Soon after, Ah Jiang replied to him, the location of the mobile phone shows that he didn't go out after returning home in the morning. Fu Xinqing was already in the car, he nodded slightly upon hearing this. When he got outside He Yan's house, with a collected expression, he walked quickly into the building. When he arrived outside his house, he realized that he had lost the key to her house. His handsome face became even colder, he took a step back and straight up kicked the door hard. Such a strong anti-theft door broke after only 2 kicks from him. The door was kicked open with a bang, and he immediately spotted her on the sofa. He Yan was sitting on the couch on her back, still lucid, with a face as pale as paper and her hands resting on the armrest of the sofa. Blood slowly emerged from her wrists, dripped down her fingertips, and formed a huge puddle on the ground. Fu Xinqing walked over, stared down at her, and asked her with a sneer, "Teacher Yan, aren't you very smart? Don't you know that it is very difficult to die by cutting the vein? Next time, cut deeper, it's even better if you cut the artery directly." She unexpectedly smiled, murmuring, "No wonder, every time I cut, the bleeding stops after some time. It turns out I used the wrong method." He was taken aback by her words, pulled her up from the sofa, and asked coldly, "What's this? An escape suicide play, or are you using your life to bet on whether I will soften my heart for you?" She could not stand properly, but her expression was calm as she stared at him and asked, "I won the bet, didn't I?" Fu Xinqing's teeth itched with hatred. He let her go and let her plop softly on the sofa, smiled slightly, and said, "Since you said so, then let's see which is tougher, your life or my heart." Dr. Wan has rushed over from behind. When he entered the door and saw He Yan's injury, he was about to step forward for emergency treatment but was stopped by Fu Xinqing. "No need," he said, then turned his head to order Ah Jiang, "Close the door so we don't scare the neighbors." Ah Jiang just obeyed the orders given to him. Fu Xinqing saw Yan, smiled mockingly, and asked her, "Do you need help?" He Yan smiled effortlessly and replied softly, "No, thank you." She reached out to touch the blood-stained blade but stopped right before she made another cut. Fu Xinqing poked fun at her, "What? Don't dare to." He Yan suddenly reached for her phone, turned it on, ignored Fu Xinqing's gaze, and called Liang Yuanza. When he picked it up, "It's me," He Yan replied softly, with a sincere smile on her face. "Are you okay?" Fu Xinqing didn't know what Liang Yuanza said, but He Yan looked calm and relaxed, the smile on her face was even happier. She said to Liang Yuanza unhurriedly, "It's nothing, I just miss you. I just wanted to hear your voice. Take care of yourself." Fu Xinqing sneered and sat there, looking at her coldly. Her forehead was covered with cold sweat, but she persisted in saying a few more words to Liang Yuanza, said goodbye to him calmly, and then hung up the phone. He watched in horror as she picked up the blade with trembling hands, her intent unmistakable. He couldn't let her go through with it. Without a second thought, he lunged towards her, his movements swift and instinctual. Fu Xinqing's hand closed around her wrist with an iron grip as he turned towards Dr. Wan, who had been standing nearby in shock. His voice rang out sharply, "Get over here." He Yan, however, remained strangely calm, her gaze locked onto his. In a soft, almost whisper, she uttered, "Chen Jijia, do you think I'm really afraid of death?" "No, I'm not afraid. For me, it takes more courage to live." Fu Xinqing's anger and desperation only intensified as he held her wrist tightly. He spoke with an edge of desperation, "He Yan, don't even think about it. You don't get to die without my permission. Don't you even dare." After the initial chaos, Dr. Wan stepped closer and assessed He Yan's condition. He spoke cautiously to Fu Xinqing, "Mr. Fu, the patient has lost a lot of blood and needs to be sent to the hospital for a blood transfusion as soon as possible." As they rushed He Yan to the hospital, Fu Xinqing couldn't help but feel a peculiar mix of emotions. The car sped away from her house, but to him, it felt agonizingly slow. He couldn't comprehend the strange guilt and worry that had taken root in him. All he knew was that he didn't want her to die, and the thought of her growing colder in his arms haunted him. Late at night, He Yan finally woke up. Her eyes held a solemn and distant look as she turned her head to find Fu Xinqing by her bedside. His gaze met hers, filled with an unusual gravity, devoid of his usual coldness or anger. Despite everything, she managed a faint smile and croaked out, "I won the bet, didn't I?" Fu Xinqing continued to study her in silence, and after a while, he couldn't help but let out a weary smile. He nodded in admission, conceding defeat, "Yes, you won the bet." In a drawer nearby, there lay a document, its yellowed pages hinting at its age. Fu Xinqing retrieved it and held it up for He Yan to see. He inquired softly, was this the reason you tried everything possible to get my fingerprints? A bittersweet grin tugged at He Yan's lips, and she nodded in acknowledgement, yes. With a lighter in hand, Fu Xinqing locked eyes with her, then ignited the document, turning it into ashes right before her eyes. The past, with its secrets and hidden truths, was reduced to nothing. He turned back to her, his expression now softened. He asked her, from now on, are there any further means for you to prove that I am Shinjijie? He Yan's response was unequivocal, none. Satisfaction filled Fu Xinqing as he made his decision. He told her, that's good. From today on, just stay by my side sincerely, okay? He Yan smiled and inquired, no longer for revenge. Fu Xinqing's lips tightened slightly as he gave his answer, no. She continued, until you get bored of me? Fu Xinqing nodded, his gaze unwavering, yes, until I get bored of you. The third day found He Yan at Fu Xinqing's apartment, grappling with the aftermath of her suicide attempt. Her mother had been persistently calling her, and she needed a convincing excuse for her extended absence. The truth of her wrist-slitting attempt was not something she wanted her mother to discover. So, she concocted a story about an impromptu vacation with her colleagues in Guizhou. Sitting on the bed, Fu Xinqing listened as He Yan spun her tale for her mother. She painted a vivid picture of the beautiful scenery while bemoaning the poor internet connection that prevented video calls. With a teasing glance from Fu Xinqing, she continued her charade, reassuring her mother about her safety and even sending an itinerary to her father's mailbox. She promised to return before her parents left and then ended the call. He Yan then turned to Fu Xinqing, casually raising her injured wrist to him. She remarked, I had no choice. It's better than having my mother see this, wouldn't you say? Fu Xinqing, feeling a pang of irritation, retorted coldly, you should have used more force to just cut off that claw of yours. He Yan looked at him with the patience of a parent dealing with a stubborn child and said, didn't you say that? Don't mention the past. Come on, Fu Xinqing, can't you be more generous? Fu Xinqing was taken aback by her calm demeanor and her next request. He watched as she lifted the quilt and sat up, nonchalantly asking him for a favor, can you do me a favor? Wrap this wrist with plastic wrap. I want to take a shower, but I'm afraid I'll wet the wound. Fu Xinqing hesitated for a moment, then casually set aside the document he had been holding. He stood up and picked her up gently, cradling her in a princess carry, and carried her to the bathroom. He Yan didn't resist, instead, she wrapped her arms around his neck and requested, you better wrap my wrist first. Fu Xinqing agreed, no problem, just raise it higher. You don't need to use your hands. With care, Fu Xinqing helped her shower. Afterward, he gently dried her hair. He Yan sensed something was amiss, and her unease prompted her to question, Fu Xinqing, are you okay? Why do I feel so uneasy? A small, unconscious smile played on Fu Xinqing's lips as he replied, He Yan, when will you stop playing tricks on me? He Yan's eyes flickered briefly, but she decided not to prolong the act. She admitted, when did I play tricks on you again? What's wrong with wanting to spend time with you? Fu Xinqing probed further, asking, do you think that spending time together is just a way for me to vent my anger? Unable to keep up the pretense any longer, He Yan met his gaze and responded honestly, yes, I really can't think of any other way. It's better to have you vent your anger in bed than elsewhere. With their mutual understanding clear, their conversation led to more passionate pursuits, deepening their connection. Afterward, Fu Xinqing left the room and sought Jiang to discuss their ongoing matters. Jiang reported that most things had been resolved, including the retrieval of the file and relevant records from past years. However, the identity of those working for the Chens remained elusive, and there was no trace of communication between He Yan and the Chen family. Fu Xinqing couldn't help but chuckle, recognizing that he had underestimated He Yan's abilities. He mused, it's unbelievable that she could do so many things right under my nose. It seems I underestimated her. Their conversation took a more serious turn when Jiang mentioned that Fu Xinqing's father had learned about the police incident and forbade his further involvement with the Chen family. Fu Xinqing expressed his frustration, questioning his father's lack of support and urging him to step in and clear his name. Seeing Fu Xinqing's anger, Jiang voiced his concern but also mentioned that he was bound by loyalty to the Fu family. Fu Xinqing reassured him that loyalty was valued and encouraged him to heed his orders. He also hinted at Jiang's future prospects within the Fu clan once he became the head. Sitting comfortably on the sofa, Fu Xinqing issued a final command to Jiang, go check Chen Hagwa, the younger one. Since the old one is cunning, we'll start with the young one. They will pay the price for offending me. His resolve remained unwavering. Jiang, ever respectful, acknowledged, understood, Mr. Fu. He quietly left Fu Xinqing's study, heading downstairs. However, on his way out, he encountered He Yan, who was wearing a nightgown. She gestured towards the study door opposite and inquired if Mr. Fu was inside. Ah Jiang nodded in response and continued on his way. He Yan approached the study and lightly knocked on the heavy door. Fu Xinqing's casual voice invited her in, "Come in." The door was cumbersome, and He Yan struggled to open it fully on her first attempt. She tried again, pushing harder until a narrow gap allowed her to slip inside. Her efforts to fit through the narrow opening amused Fu Xinqing, and he couldn't help but chuckle, remarking, "Look at your strength. Where did your energy from earlier go?" Ignoring his teasing, He Yan turned her attention to the study's furnishings. As her gaze settled on a tall bookshelf wall, her eyes lit up. She approached the bookshelf, raising her head to examine it more closely. Interrupting her reverie, Fu Xinqing asked casually, "How did you wake up?" "I thought, given how you were sleeping, you'd at least sleep until dawn." He Yan turned to him, looking somewhat surprised and slightly embarrassed. Despite his regret for his earlier comment, Fu Xinqing remained stubborn, instructing her to come closer. Seated across from him at the table, He Yan curled up, her legs pulled close to her chest. She admitted, "Fu Xinqing, I had a nightmare. I dreamed that I ran away, but you caught me again, and not just me, my parents, too. You were furious and intentionally tortured them in front of me, forcing me to watch." Fu Xinqing observed her and asked directly, "Do you want to run away?" He Yan, her lips curving into a rueful smile, confessed, "Before that dream, I often thought about running away." Fu Xinqing extended his hand, inviting her closer with warmth in his voice. "Come here, sit by my side." He Yan obliged, moving closer and allowing her good hand to rest in his. She gazed down at him and softly asked, "Fu Xinqing, I have one request. No matter what happens in the future, please don't harm my family. Our issues will be resolved between us, and I won't complain about the outcome, as long as my family isn't involved." Fu Xinqing lowered his gaze and inquired casually, "Do you trust me?" After a thoughtful pause, He Yan responded, "I do." With a half-smile, Fu Xinqing embraced her and made a promise, "All right, I promise you. Even if you try to run away, I'll only catch you and bring you back. I won't harm your parents." He Yan expressed her gratitude sincerely, and Fu Xinqing held her gently in his arms. However, he swiftly changed the topic, asking for answers to a lingering question, "Since I've promised you, it's only fair that you show me some sincerity. Tell me, how did you contact the Chens? Why can't I find any clues in the call records of the grandparent and child phones?" He Yan chuckled and offered a half-truthful response, "I asked someone if I could borrow their phone. My pretty face can be quite convincing." She continued, "Once, I left my phone at school and secretly visited the Chen family." He Yan's gaze shifted to a framed photo on the table. She picked it up and inquired, "Who's this?" Fu Xinqing, with a smirk, replied, "Definitely not me." Setting the frame back down, He Yan remarked candidly, "Shen Jijie and Fu Xinqing are two entirely different individuals, with different interests, hobbies, and personalities. Why would you be interested in Shen Jijie's study?" Fu Xinqing found himself unexpectedly caught in her trap. He looked at her and asked, "What do you think Shen Jijie would like?" He Yan pondered for a moment before answering seriously, "What do those gangsters like? Drinking, fighting, bike racing, and, don't forget, playing with women." Fu Xinqing was taken aback, unsure whether to laugh or be exasperated. He commented, "Have you watched too many movies?" By this point, He Yan's consciousness had started to blur. She heard Fu Xinqing's voice from behind her, seemingly out of nowhere, saying, "Hey Yan, if you want to coax someone, whether you are sincere or not, you can make that person smile." Her mumbling response came softly, "Thank you for the compliment." Fu Xinqing gently picked her up and held her in his arms, saying with a smile, "Let's go back to sleep." While talking on the phone, He Yan shouted, "Guogua, we have nothing to talk about. Please don't try to contact me again. Also, please tell your grandma to take care of herself and stop investigating." After hanging up the phone, she received another call, this time from Su Qinghua. He Yan answered the phone, her voice sounding very ordinary as she said, "Su Qinghua, what's up?" Su Qinghua replied, "Nothing much. I just got paid for my part-time job, and I would like to buy you dinner." Unexpectedly, He Yan agreed immediately, and hearing this, Su Qinghua was overjoyed. Meanwhile, He Yan asked Fu Xinqing, "Can I go out tonight? Su Qinghua invited me to dinner this afternoon." Fu Xinqing paused for a brief moment before asking her, "Su Qinghua?" He Yan's tone carried a hint of helplessness as she replied, "Fu Xinqing, don't be so stingy. Or do you want to come with me?" Fu Xinqing scoffed lightly, he doesn't deserve the honor yet. Saying that, he kissed her. 30 minutes later, Fu Xinqing left the house, where Jiang was already waiting for him. Jiang informed Fu Xinqing, Mr. Fu, Xiao Wu has called Chen Hagwa to Chanyan Villa. Fu Xinqing ordered Jiang, then let's go. When Fu Xinqing arrived at night blitz, Xiao Wu called Sister Hua and asked her to send some entertainers. After a while, a few women entered Fu Xinqing's private box, filling it with a crowd. Suddenly, a waiter rushed in and shouted, "Little brother, there's a fight outside." Outside the box, a bald man was shouting, "You're the kind of woman who pretends to be pure, but I don't even know how many men have touched you." Hearing these words, Chen Hagwa slapped the bald man. The bald man got angry and started walking toward her. A hand fell on his shoulder, stopping him in his tracks. When the bald man turned back, he saw Jiang and informed the girl, "Mr. Fu told you to come over." Upon hearing this, Chen Hagwa followed Jiang to Fu Xinqing's private box. When Chen Hagwa opened the door, she saw that the box was full of people, and Fu Xinqing was sitting on the sofa, enjoying his drink. When Fu Xinqing saw Chen Hagwa standing at the door, he said lightly, "Everyone out immediately." Upon his command, everyone left, leaving only Fu Xinqing and Chen Hagwa in the large room. Chen Hagwa looked at Fu Xinqing and took the initiative to say, "I thank you for what happened just now, but..." Fu Xinqing suddenly interrupted her and asked, "Chen Hagwa, what's your reason for coming here? I have investigated you, and I know who your father is. I can also imagine why you hid your identity here before. But now that your identity has been revealed, should you really be coming back to such a place?" Chen Hagwa couldn't help but glance down at her work clothes and explained, "I'm temporarily replacing a colleague who isn't feeling well." Fu Xinqing, still smiling, simply said, "All right, you can go now, can't you? I'll ask Jiang to send you back." Saying that, he actually called Jiang to come in. He treated her like a child who didn't know any better. However, the more she thought about it, the more unwilling she became. She turned back and stood in front of him, looking at him, and asked, "Fu Xinqing, since you know why I came here, why did you help me just now?" Fu Xinqing looked up at her and said indifferently, "Little girl, I admire your courage. However, having courage is one thing, and being rash and impulsive is another." Chen Hagwa recalled hearing similar words from He Yan in the past. At that time, He Yan had said, "I acknowledge your courage, but I don't consider recklessness to be a form of courage." This comparison made Chen Hagwa angry. She clenched her fists and looked at Fu Xinqing coldly. "Yes, I am. I can't hide away like a coward. I can't just think about small things. I'm not afraid of death, and I'm not afraid of you killing me." Fu Xinqing frowned at her, but after a moment, he couldn't help but laugh. There was some helplessness in his smile. He motioned for her to sit down and said, "Chen Hagwa, I won't kill you. Moreover, your father's death has nothing to do with me." Chen Hagwa didn't want him to bring up her father and looked at him warily. Seeing her expression, he sighed and laughed at himself. "I don't need to deceive you. It's just you and your grandmother left in your family now. If I really had the intention to buy you off and get rid of you, I could easily make you disappear in a remote mountain field, and no one would come looking for you." She looked at him suspiciously, thought about it, and suddenly asked, "Are you Shinjijie?" Upon hearing her question, Fu Xinqing felt quite helpless and asked her, "Do you believe that I am Shinjijie, a former criminal, released from prison and then transformed into the president of Fu's enterprise? Do you believe that?" "But he said you are Shinjijie," Chen Hagwa insisted. Fu Xinqing's eyes dimmed as he looked up at her again and said with a faint smile, "There are some disputes between He Yan and me, but it has nothing to do with your father. I'm sorry for your father's accident, even though it has nothing to do with me." Chen Hagwa seized on the key point in his words and asked, "What's your dispute with Miss Yan?" Fu Xinqing pursed his lips slightly, and his expression turned cold. He refused to answer, saying, "It's not your concern. It's related to my father's death, so it does concern me." Chen Hagwa responded immediately, sounding assertive. "Shortly after he asked my father to verify your identity, he died in a sudden car accident, and the vehicle involved was owned by Fu's enterprise. Don't you think this is too coincidental?" Fu Xinqing looked stern and serious. He asked her, "Do you know how many companies and how many vehicles Fu's enterprise owns? If you think I'm the murderer of your father just because the vehicle is owned by Fu, don't you find that reasoning ridiculous?" Chen Hagwa retorted, "Of course, it's not just about that. The focus is on Speaker Yan. If you don't feel guilty, why don't you dare to tell her?" Fu Xinqing's frown deepened, and then he fell silent once more. After a while, his expression softened slightly. "I like He Yan, but she believes I'm Shinjijia. That's the source of our dispute. He shook his head and laughed at himself. It's absurd, isn't it? But the world can be absurd. I met her by chance, fell in love with her, but she is determined to prove that I am Shinjijia because of my appearance. This revelation left Chen Hagwa astonished. She remarked, but Teacher Yen said she has a fiancé. Fu Xinqing smiled and replied, yes, she does have a fiancé, but I'm not willing to just accept it as it is and let someone else have her. So, she resents me even more. Chen Hagwa was at a loss for words, but Fu Xinqing broke the silence by chuckling. Alright, little girl, I don't want to discuss these matters any further, and I won't accept any moral judgments from you. Just like He Yen, when you get close to me, you want my fingerprints, don't you? Now that Chen Hagwa knew everything, she felt that concealing her intentions any longer would only make her appear petty. She admitted, yes, the fingerprints she obtained previously were not clear enough, so they couldn't be used. Fu Xinqing looked slightly surprised, then laughed and said, she's not a professional. Different tools and methods are needed to obtain fingerprints in different places. Chen Hagwa didn't know what to do, but she said, yes, if it's a finger mark on a smooth surface, you need aluminum powder foam and special water glue transfer paper. If the powder particles are too large, and then they are stained with transparent tape, they will not be clear enough. Fu Xinqing suddenly realized how He Yen had managed to get his fingerprints when she took the milk cup upstairs that morning. She had kissed him passionately to distract him and then secretly taken his fingerprints and placed them in her bag as if nothing had happened.